Now, here's the kicker. When I talked to my dad about this, he said, well, it's unfortunate. He said, unfortunately, some things like this happen in some churches. It's best we not talk about it. And I said, why exactly? Right. And he's like, well, it's just bad for the ministry if things like this are talked about.
100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening.
Well, Chad, aka Arch Radish, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm really excited to talk to you. I know that we've kind of been working on this for a couple of weeks, getting this coordinated. So stoked to have you on the show. And I really appreciate everything that I know we're about to talk about and the things that I don't even know about yet.
Well, hey, thank you for having me. And I'm always happy to talk about, just the weird Fundie upbringing that I was in, the cult in general. It's something that I feel like not a lot of people have paid attention to, like the details of. Right. And the fact that you're using your platform and your voice to amplify that just really means a lot. So, yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. And I also just want to say respectfully, I know that it's not always an easy thing to talk about and to kind of put out there. So that I appreciate as well. As much as I'm like, oh, yay, content. It's also like I completely understand that for many, many people, this has taken years for them to be able to even talk about. And some people aren't even there yet. And so for those who are listening who tell me that they can't subscribe to the podcast publicly, thank you from them as well, because I hope they hear something in your story and they relate to it and know that there's life afterward, I guess.
Absolutely. It was actually a podcast that really helped in my deconstruction in general. So, yeah, the more voices that are out there sharing their experiences about fundamentalism and, some of the abuses they may have grown up with and what have you, the more I feel like it actually helps us normalize and open up that conversation. So I'm a big believer in that.
100%. That being said, first of all, where did the name Arch Radish come from? What is that? Where did that come from?
Arch Radish is actually kind of an amalgam of my name, and it's like most folks know me as Chad and everything, and that's part of it. But the rest, is a nice little bonus for people who know me and who can figure it out. So it's all great.
That's funny. I thought for sure it was going to be like some Star Wars related thing, like nickname you came up with as a kid. You're like, no, it's just mixed letters. So tell us about yourself. Like, what are you about? What do you do? Interesting facts. Let us get to know you a little bit.
All right. Well, I live in Alabama. I'm in the Birmingham, Alabama area. Oh, absolutely. Well, I consider myself to be football agnostic. I don't know if I believe in the existence of a football, but but around here you have to say one or the other. So I usually play the safe route and say, go UAB Blazers. So there's that. Hey, still technically Division I, last I checked. But yes, I do live in the Birmingham, Alabama area. I'm a project manager by day, and I am a improv comedian / technician by night, because I'm a tech for an improv troupe, but that also means that when the cast is short, you're up. So yep. I am all over the place. I very much enjoy that. I was raised in the independent Fundamental Baptist Church, and I was also raised on a subset of that in the Institute in Basic Life Principles cult under their homeschooling branch, the Advanced Training Institute. And I spent basically practically my entire school ages following that. And then I eventually left fundamentalism in general in my mid to late 20s. And ever since then have kind of taken to the internet to tell my story. I'm at Arch Radish on TikTok and various other places on the internet. And I try to use my voice to try to let people know, because most people, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know about the Duggars and their participation in the cult. Yeah, you do.
That's all I ever talk about. Are you kidding?
And but in addition to the Duggars, and I think it's very important to talk about them as a family, but I feel like the tabloid nature of their family and just how mainstream media focuses just on their particular weirdness, as it were, not to slam them, but just kind of let's face it, that's why they're in the news. It misses out on the bigger picture that
Yes.
there were other families that went through a lot of the things that the Duggar family did. They just didn't have a TV camera pointed at them.
Right. Yes.
So that's
Yes.
something I've been very passionate about sharing for the past few years.
Absolutely. And I know that because of these fundamentalist families that are becoming like social media stars and television stars, I know that IBLP has been in the news a lot more. It's kind of been like making a lot more waves on like Instagram. But I think the problem with it, and I think why I'm glad to have people like you on the podcast to talk about it, is for people who did not grow up very fundamentalist or evangelical, the media is making it seem like a cutesy little house on the prairie type lifestyle, have as many babies as God will bless you with, and they're not being exposed enough to the toxicity and the harms and the cult behavior involved in those churches. And I almost hesitate to call them churches. And what was a little bit disappointing was this new book that Jinger Duggar released. Even she's not willing to call it a cult, basically.
Yes.
Right? Like, it was sold as though it's going to be this, like, it basically her version of the book Spare, which, don't get me wrong, like, I don't at any point ever like hype talking trash about people, you know, but I thought it was going to be this awakening, this realization, like telling people about what it's really like to be in a group like that, in a cult like that. And what it actually became was, I went from one religion to the other religion, and here's my story. And you're like, oh, you're not through it. You're not through it yet. You're not through it. And so I just wanted to kind of take the veil off the almost glamour that this sect or this cult has been given because of reality TV, because, oh, it's quirky, it's cute, they make their own clothes, they buy everything in bulk, all the kids hold hands, and you're like, okay, but... And I think we've been exposed a little bit to the seedy underbelly of the whole thing when we look at how the oldest brother's like sexual misconduct was handled and issues with CP and things like that. But there's so much more to it. And so I think having people come out and be like, I know you guys like the pictures of all the prairie dresses, but let's talk about what actually happens is very important. It's so important.
Yes. And I love how you brought up Ginger's book, because I listened to the audiobook as soon as it released, because I just had little hints of what she had been saying in the lead up to the book's release that made me think this is not going to be what everyone thinks it is. Right. Because when you've been in the cult as long as I have, you hear the coded language, you hear the words, and you think, I know what she's actually saying.
Right.
So I listened to it, and pretty much as I expected, like you said, it was. I will give her credit for this. She did go after Bill Gothard, the founder of IBLP, very hard.
Yes. Yes.
I did appreciate that about her. Like you said, she didn't call him a cult leader directly.
Right.
She did at one point compare him to Jim Jones directly, which I thought was a pretty blatant.
Yeah, like sis sees.
Yeah.
You know, she sees.
Yeah, like she's very much there, but whether through advice from some third party or what have you, she doesn't go all the way in to call IBLP a cult or Bill Gothard a cult leader, because as she claims, she's not a cult expert. And I myself, I'm not a very educated person. Obviously, I was an ATI, but and I don't have any special qualifications myself, other than having been raised in it. And I may not be a general cult expert, but I am an expert on that cult, and it's a cult. So
right. And also, I want people to know that I'm not at all slamming her, being like, "Girl, you didn't tell that," because I've spoken to enough people who have escaped that cult, that it is not easy at all to make those statements and those accusations. You know, as I mentioned when you first joined, it takes people oftentimes years to ever even admit there was anything wrong or to stop feeling guilt about why they left. So in no way am I saying like, oh, she should have like called everybody out. I'm saying her book is a prime example of somebody who's still in the process of processing what they went through. Like, you know that she sees it. There are clear moments where you could tell she was like writing like, oh, I'm gonna, and then the next morning woke up and was like, maybe I'll take a couple of these paragraphs and like change them a little bit, because there is that legitimate fear of losing your entire support system and your support network, and also that fear of potentially speaking against God himself, who she clearly still believes in. So in no way am I saying like, oh, she should have spilled more tea, but I was disappointed to see that her book was a prime example of somebody who thinks they are out of it and they're not out of it.
Yeah.
Not quite yet.
And it's unfortunate for the reasons that you said, and also because, at the very end of the book is where I was most disappointed. Because as someone who also left the cult and deconstructed and got away from the fundamentalism that I was taught from several sources growing up, I myself, left the faith entirely. I became an atheist. And I'm the sort of person who, while I believe that my view is correct, I don't want anybody to have that forced on them as part of their deconstruction. If they end up in a different place, I'm okay with that, just as long as they're not trying to, force where they've been or where they've come to on anyone else.
Right.
If you can find a way, in my view, to practice religion in a way that makes sense to you and to make your life better, that's perfectly okay. Just for those of us who ended up differently, please respect that we have found different ways. At the very end of the book, she flat out says, if you, and I'm spoiling it for anyone who hasn't read it, but but she says, if your disentanglement, because she doesn't like the term deconstruction, as I recall, if your disentanglement, as she puts it, does not lead to Christ, you did it wrong. And I'm like, you don't get to say that. Because
that is not a decision you get to make for me. Excuse me.
Exactly, because other people have ended up in various different places, and even some of the exers who I know who are still believers, even they have said, yeah, that was over the line. Like, that's not what we're about at all, and we're a bit disappointed in it. And what really is harmful about that to me is the fact that it continues to kind of put this to anyone who's coming in from the outside, who's already got a distorted view of IBLP, to put her particular church and her belief system now up against IBLP as these two warring factions. Well, anyone who's coming in from the outside will look at that and say, oh, two fringe religions fighting against each other. Doesn't apply to me, so I'm just going to go on with my life. And unfortunately, there's still, IBLP is still around. They are still causing harm, in my view.
Yes.
And my end goal, the one thing I want to do, and it's an ambitious goal, but the one thing I want to do through my raising awareness and through my talk about it and through presenting it through my view, granted, on a smaller audience than Jinger has, and I probably never will get to that point. But my whole goal is to get IBLP to shut down. And I think it's ambitious but realistic.
Right. Because
they are hemorrhaging cash. They have already stopped their homeschooling operations. They're selling off their properties all over the world, which used to be their pride and joy. And the more people pay attention to them and see them for what they really are, and the more people dig into it, I think that they're not going to be able to sustain themselves moving forward. Right.
And worst, or not worst case scenario, but the least we can expect is them to be labeled a cult.
Yes.
Everywhere they are, for people to admit, if they are there, you're inviting a cult. If they're hashtag cult. Like, the least we can do is call it what it is, right?
Exactly.
And the good news is, I think people are coming, the people who see this happening, the people who see it being glamorized, who see it being basically attributed with people like that family and these other families who are famous on TV and Instagram and stuff. I think more people like you are coming out and being like, whoa, and I hope that there's enough people that come out that it becomes less of, you're just mad because you didn't get a TV show out of it. It didn't work out for you. Like, you're just mad because you couldn't, be Christian enough or, follow the rules close enough. You struggled. You're a lost lamb, but,
Oh yeah, actually, can I make a quick point about that?
Yeah.
Because you actually hit on something very important when people who are still in the cult or are still in fundamentalism, when they look at people like us who have left and they say, well, you're just mad because you weren't able to hack it and everything. The problem with IBLP is the rules were made for you to not live up to them.
Literally, they were built for you to fail and apologize for. That is the whole thing.
So if anything went wrong, Bill Gothard or anybody in his inner circle could look at your life, find one place where you weren't living up to the standard that they had written, and they say, well, it's because you're doing this. If you had just done this better, then you wouldn't be in the mess you're in. Now, weirdly enough, that never applied to Bill Gothard or his circle. Even now, Bill Gothard is no longer part of IBLP because he has had multiple allegations of sexual harassment against him, very credible ones, and he had to resign from the IBLP board in order to, not really face any further consequences, in my view.
Yeah, but in order to just go back to living his normal life.
Even though he keeps trying to get back on the board, which is a whole nother ordeal. But the thing is, even to this day, he and his ardent supporters claim that this didn't happen because he failed to live up to, his own standards. They claim it's an attack from Satan. So if you're underneath the power structure, you are set up to fail. If you are the power structure, nothing you can do will make you fail. Right. It's all an attack of Satan or what have you.
And not only that, but if you have read the Bible, you read about how it's chapter after chapter about how you're going to fail. He already knows this. You don't know what it is yet that you're going to do, but he knows. So just get ready for it, but also don't do it. But also when you do it, ask forgiveness, but also make sure you ask forgiveness well enough, but you're going to do it again anyway. The whole system, you are set up to fail. And your entire life becomes basically this game of leapfrog from lily pad to lily pad, where you're just praying that, literally and figuratively, that you make it to the next lily pad, and then turning around and looking at the people on the other lily pads being like, wow, y'all are underachievers. Good luck, and then feeling bad for everybody else who's like, swimming, not jumping from a lily pad to lily pad isn't that bad. It's actually pretty nice. You should join the water, Right. So for you, I literally just came up with that analogy right then, and it feels good. So for you personally, for your story, what was the first inkling to you that you can remember where you're like, this doesn't add up, like something's off here enough for me to start questioning things?
Wow. It was not really one thing. It was a series of unfortunate events, as it were. So I was raised in a independent fundamental Baptist preacher's home. Right. My dad, he was trained at Hiles-Anderson College in Hammond, Indiana.
Wow. Yeah.
Which, to give you an idea how fundamentalist my dad was, he had an argument with Jack Hiles, the founder of the college, and actually left. Like he was too Fundie for Jack Hiles.
Whoa.
So yeah. Which,
whoa.
If any of y'all are familiar, that's pretty damn Fundie.
Yeah.
But yes, he was a pastor in Alabama for several years. Then he became a missionary to the Netherlands and Belgium, because if you're going to be a missionary, you might as well go to some of the most Christianized and affluent nations in the world, I suppose. But then he came back to Alabama for a while and pastored a church here. So I was raised in this from, basically before I could even walk and talk. We joined ATI a little bit later in my life when I was about 6 or 7 years old. But even then, at that point, it was the way the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church works is that even though it's not a organized denomination with like a central board, such as the Southern Baptist Convention, for example, the IFB still follows different camps of different preachers who are very much revered in several churches. So Jack Hiles was one of the people that many churches revered. And then there were other preachers like Lester Roloff, who himself was a child abuser on several levels. There was just, this whole list of people I was taught to look up to. Bill Gothard was another person I was taught to look up to. We went back overseas as missionaries when I was 12 years old. We stayed there till I was 19. And then I spent all my years overseas looking up to these people back here in the States. And also, Bill Gothard from being homeschooled in this through my high school years. So when I came back to the States, I really didn't have much else to look forward to other than, continuing on in ministry or to find some church to, settle down in and move on. I didn't have a lot of life skills, and college was very much discouraged. So I started working for the church that my dad started working for when he retired from the mission field. They needed a music minister, and I happened to take some music when I was in Europe as a kind of an enrichment activity. So I became music minister for this church, and it was a struggling congregation. It had been a long-standing congregation. Their pastor of 50 years resigned due to health issues, and their new pastor was a youngish fellow who didn't have the respect of the older folks in the congregation. And after about a year of struggling to get the attendance numbers up, and I was literally working a second full-time job at that church in addition to my regular job. After a year of struggling with that, it turned out that that pastor was accused by his wife of being emotionally abusive. She left and sued him in court for emotional abuse.
Wow.
And we found out, my dad and I, that this had happened before at another church, but we didn't know about this when that church had brought him on as pastor.
First of all, kudos to her, because like, not only do you not leave, but you do not turn on your husband.
Yes.
In Christianity. That's wild.
Yep.
Wow.
Unfortunately, there is a sad ending. She did end up going back to him after about a month. And he claimed that, despite everything that had happened, it was all settled. Nothing else would ever happen bad. And he wanted to be pastor of that church again. Please,
and God probably brought her back to him,
Yeah. And that church, despite all the evidence to the contrary, voted him back in with just one member vote difference. And I resigned. I said, even as indoctrinated as I was, I said, something is not right here.
Right.
So I left. And that was the first inkling that I had that something was wrong, because we had done everything correctly, and yet what we were promised that God would bless didn't happen, and the church is back in the hands of this corrupt pastor. Now here's the kicker. When I talked to my dad about this, he said, well, it's unfortunate. He said, unfortunately, some things like this happen in some churches. It's best we not talk about it. And I said, why exactly? Right. And he's like, well, it's just bad for the ministry if things like this are talked about. And I'm like, you're the person who took Jack Hyles on. Like, you had an argument with him because you disagreed on a doctrinal thing. This is far worse. People can get hurt from this, and you're saying don't say anything about it. Yeah. So that was the first inkling to me. I'm like, something's up. Like, something is clearly wrong, but it's not mathing. So that was when I eventually I got out of church ministry, like on a formal level after that, and I just became a layperson. But after that, in my own healing from that whole trauma, I came back to Alabama, and I started when I was getting on my feet, getting a job, and what have you. I started looking on the internet, and I found places, especially people I had actually grown up with in the ministry, like online forums where people were talking about similar issues that their churches had gone through as well. And one of them was run by a good friend of mine who was a missionary kid in the same mission I was, he ran a blog called Stuff Fundies Like. So I actually got on there and started talking with other folks. I kept hearing these stories over and over, very similar circumstances. And that was what led me to another website called Recovering Grace, which ended up being the website that hosted the allegations against Bill Gothard. It was dedicated to studying Bill Gothard and where he went wrong. And that was my first inkling that something was wrong with ATI and IBLP as well. And I just went down a rabbit hole from there. I'm like, so many people knew about this, and yet now they're finally being able to start speaking up thanks to the internet.
Yeah.
So eventually, like, I've been doing all this on the quiet. My parents were still very much in my life at that point, even though I was out and living my own life. But at one point, they had noticed that I had stopped going to like the same fundamentalist churches that they were, affiliated with. Yeah. They said, hey, nobody's seen you around lately. Because at that point I had started visiting some mainstream churches just to kind of, see what else was going on out there. And I flat out told them, I said, look, so many, I've come across these stories. I said, Bill Gothard's had allegations against him. Jack Hyles had allegations against him as well. His son-in-law as well, very famously, was arrested and convicted of trafficking a minor across state lines for sexual purposes. And I told my dad, I said, this keeps happening. And I found out other people in my life in ATI locally here in Alabama, they had fallen into some very similar situations in their families. And I said, this has happened a lot, and you never told me. I said, well, did you know all about all this? He said, well, yeah, but we can't really talk about it. I said, that's the wrong answer.
Well, you can't or you won't, because those are two totally different things. You can't or you won't.
Well, yeah, I said, I thought you didn't know about this, but now that I know that you knew and you said nothing, well, now I have to question everything I was raised in.
Right.
because I didn't
Right.
sign up to hurt people.
No.
People are being
Absolutely.
hurt,
Yeah.
and I left.
Wild. Wild. And when you left, did it feel like I know that sometimes the right decision can still feel bad. Was that how you felt? Did you feel like a giant weight was off your shoulder? Like when you officially were done and it was kind of like known that you weren't coming back, did that feel good? Did that feel bad? Did you struggle with that? What was that like?
Well, that's when the wait started.
Yeah.
Because even in leaving, at that point, I was about roughly 26, 27 years old.
Yeah, it's still so young. Like that's so young, especially with
But
such a huge decision like that.
but when you've been told from the age of 13 that you're supposed to be mature and already an adult in the eyes of the church, is a whole, you feel like you've been duped. And
Don't you love how like when you are doing what everybody wants you to do, they're like, you're so mature, you're an adult, grow up.
Mhm.
And then when you're like questioning anything, they're like, you're a child, you don't know anything.
100%. And yeah, that was the thing. My dad would tell me like, well, you just don't understand everything and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I understand enough that you've stood in a pulpit and called out people's sin for years, and yet you refuse to call out the sin of your friends, and people are actually hurt.
Yeah.
And that really hurts me. So
Yeah.
that was when the realization hit me. It's not like, oh, I'm free, I can now explore all this for myself. I'm like, number one, now all the decisions that have been made for me in my life, I got to start making them. Number two, I now have the realization that I spent the first good bit of my life promoting something that hurt people.
Right. And
And
now you don't even know if the right decisions are correct or if they're just furthering what you were told by a group that you feel is doing the wrong thing, right? It's like, like, can I value anything that they taught me, or can I pick and choose what seems correct? It's wild.
well, that's when I started going to therapy, because
Good.
I said, obviously something is wrong, and I'm going to need some actual help to get through this. Some people on the boards and everything that I had talked to, they highly recommended seeing a counselor or a therapist. So I started going to counseling, and it was interesting. Like, part of the impetus was, due to growing up in purity culture and everything, I was having trouble with relationships, and I just didn't know how to navigate that properly. I've been committed to courtship, but that kind of went several different directions. So at first I went in with the guise of, well, I'm not good at relationships. I would like to, at least talk to a counselor about this. And I spent the first two sessions going like, why is she asking so much about my childhood? That doesn't make sense. And then about the third session, she was like, okay, we need to talk. She's like, have you ever heard of a high controlling group? I was like, no. I knew about it by the time that session was over, and I was like, oh my God, this explains so much.
Wow. That's wild. But I'm so glad that you went to therapy and you got a counselor, because like I feel like not only is there shame in, questioning God and questioning your faith and leaving your family, but there's this entirely different shame that people seem to attribute with getting help. And there's like a weakness they often apply with getting help. And I'm glad that that didn't stop you, because maybe it took that therapist for you to realize like, oh shit, I'm in a cult. Like,
Yep.
I'm in a cult. She's like waiting. She thinks that's why you're there. You haven't mentioned it a single time. And finally she's like, hey, there's this big old elephant in the room and we really need to talk about it. And its name is Bill Gothard.
Yep. Oh, it was an absolute eye opener. And that
Wow.
And that was when I started like viewing or visiting mainstream churches for myself, and trying to understand what faith meant for me. And I will say, like, it was a good time of healing. It was necessary, and I'm really happy that I went through that. At the end of the day, I ended up, as I said, leaving the faith entirely through a multitude of reasons. But even that little bit of freedom where I could finally see that, I had options, and that leaving and trying to find the truth for myself wasn't going to net me the divine retribution that I thought it would. Because Bill Gothard would literally threaten death if you left his teachings. He would talk about, people having car accidents for not praying a hedge of protection around their cars
Hedge of
every day.
protection. Way to trigger
Right?
me. Way to trigger me. It's the hedge of protection.
Yeah, that was a big thing. But but yeah, it was just this whole, the freedom to actually question, the freedom to actually start down that road of saying, okay, obviously I've been wrong. What all was I wrong about, and how can I change? That freedom in and of itself was just a breath of fresh air. That was when the burden, as it were, or I should say that weight started to lift.
Good, good. And then how would you say that that's impacted your life now? Has it had anything to do with your relationship with people, be they like romantic or just friends? Has it had anything to do with like how you operate now, just kind of as a normal layman, right? Do you still find yourself kind of impacted by that experience in a way?
That's an excellent question. One thing that, and this kind of goes back to when I was in Europe. One thing that I didn't fully appreciate when I was over in Europe as a teenager, as a missionary kid, was that I was in a different culture. I was in among a different people, learning a different language, and I never stopped to appreciate the fact that I was getting that experience that not a lot of teenagers did, to get to know people on a different level that I otherwise would never get to meet in my life. And the whole time I was there viewing them as projects instead of people. And when I came back to the States, it was the same issue. Even though it was a culture I was familiar with and people I had grown up around all my life, I still viewed them as projects. If you weren't part of the church, my job was to get you to pray the prayer and, come to church. And I was literally out knocking doors. I did the Way of the Master thing from Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron and all that mess. Like, I was zealous about it, and I dare say I was good at it. Like, I would go out there and I would at least, start getting people in these like little logic traps to be like, see, this is why you need Jesus. I would like really try to sell them on it. And that's part of the stuff that still keeps me awake at night to this day, because I viewed people as projects.
Yes.
And when I got out of fundamentalism and I saw the hurt that so many people, not projects, had experienced in the cult and elsewhere, I really, I determined to try to get to know people and accept them where they're at, rather than try to get them to a place where I thought they needed to be, because I had had that done to me, and as shitty as it made me feel, I never want to do that for anybody else again.
Right.
And I get it. We're not perfect. We all do that to some degree every now and then in relationships. It happens. But that's also why, you continue to pursue therapy, you continue to try to improve, and you continue to try to come at things from a place of love and understanding, rather than trying to, trying to make everything around you fit to your norms. You just can't live life like that.
And what's wild to me is the cognitive dissonance that people have when you'll see all over like relationship channels or like chats with friends or whatever, like, honey, you can't change him. Like, don't date somebody to make them who you want them to be. Those exact same people are like, I can change them. I can bring them to church. And you're like, just last week you told me that you can't befriend somebody or date somebody in an effort to change who they are, because people should make that decision on their own. And in the exact same breath, you're like, want to come to church? I know you don't go to church, but you want to come to church and like change your beliefs. And I totally relate to what you're talking about people being projects, because I remember one of the last times I ever went to church, I was in the college group. I was in like that college age, like mid-20s group. And I started to feel like every conversation I was having with any of the males in that class, they were talking to me about whatever we were talking about, but they weren't really talking to me about that. They were trying to figure out if I was going to be a good wife. They were trying to figure out if I was wife material. They were trying to kind of like scope out, like, did I have too many opinions? Are they the same opinions they have? Like, do I seem like somebody who would kind of be more, like, would I ever be, at my husband's feet? Would I ever allow it was so weird. Like, I could tell they were talking to me, but I felt like I wasn't being talked to. I felt like I was being analyzed and studied, and I was kind of on some like bachelorette show where all the dudes were fundamentalist Christians, and was I measuring up or not? Stay tuned at 8, And I just felt so uncomfortable. I felt like I was on a speed dating date that I did not agree to every Sunday. And it just like, I feel like Christianity in particular, because I don't have personal experience, with Judaism or Islam. I feel like Christianity is such a, what can you get from people and how much? Yes. Now, Christians genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. They genuinely believe that by bringing you to church, they're doing the right thing. And by making you a Christian, they're doing the right thing. And by like basically getting as many people into the fold, they truly believe that they are saving your life and they're doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, everyone is doing everything for heaven points. Everyone's doing it for heaven points. At least with atheists who are nice to me, I know they're just being nice because they don't get anything at the end. They're just being nice. But the exact same niceness that you get with a lot of Christians, even if they're not thinking of it like that in their mind at the moment, at the end of the day, everybody wants heaven points. Everybody wants, I brought this many people to church. I brought this many atheists to God. I brought this many foreign people to know Jesus. Like I built this many huts, in a foreign country. And it just seems very disingenuous.
Yeah.
Which is odd to say because at the same time, I know that they believe literally everything they're saying. It still seems like an MLM. Like when people are like, hey, girl, do you want to be your own boss? Hey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's actually perfect analogy. And by the way, I don't know if you heard the memo, but we do get like $5 from Big Atheism every time we're nice to somebody. Just FYI.
I haven't gotten mine. Is it because I'm a woman? Probably. Who knows? I have not.
Oh yeah, there's that pay gap issue. It's the whole thing. But
I did miss the atheist conference this year. I heard lots of babies were killed, which is primo. That's what we all want. But yeah, it's interesting that an entire religion built on genuine love is one of the least genuine groups that you will ever meet.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It's the MLM aspect of it that, like, especially when I saw documentaries like Lula Rich and what have you, when I saw that, I was just like, you see, I can pretty much think of a witnessing technique that will match anything that they tell their salespeople or victims, I would say, how to do their business. I'm like, the reason we keep seeing these culty practices happen over and over is because they work. One of my favorite magicians, Brian Brushwood, actually said on his podcast, World's Greatest Con, where he goes over like some of the best con artists out there and everything. He opens up each episode saying, cons don't fool us because we're stupid. They fool us because we're human.
Yes.
And we as human beings have these mental shortcuts that we try to get to, because having to analyze every single thing out there and every potential threat is exhausting. And there are some ways that people can present themselves, and you think, hey, that person must know what they're talking about because they seem more successful or they're the loudest person in the room.
Yes,
Bill Gothard,
loudest.
or even like Bill Gothard himself is not that tall of a person. He's always kind of had this like, very to look at him in person, he's just kind of a bit easygoing looking, but he had that appearance of success that when he started speaking and he started introducing you to the concepts, that he projected that authority through subtle ways. Exactly. He was a master salesman. Yep. Exactly. And that was how he got so many people into his institute, because because he used those shortcuts.
Right. And when I say that I believe that Christians 100% honestly believe everything they believe, I think at a certain point that actually doesn't count for the higher ups. For example, I would not be surprised at all to find out that Bill Gothard has actually not believed in God for many, many years. He just figured out a really easy way to control people and get money. I wouldn't be surprised at all if these mega church pastors in Texas, and all over the US have actually been atheists for years, but they figured out that they can rake in millions and millions and millions of dollars by, touting the word of God. So I think the average Christian, I think regular everyday Christians are genuine. I think they mean what they say. I think they believe those people. Unfortunately, I think those people are very good salesmen, and they not only do a great job of warning you against, the people who are going to try and pull you away, the way that they're going to try and make you feel, that they're going to make you think that it's real fun to not be Christian anymore. That's the devil. But then they also do a really great job of like making you think that you feel really good about Christianity. They do that whole like, don't you feel loved? Don't you feel wonderful? And even though you don't, you see everybody else around you saying they do. So you're like, yeah, me too. I feel the Lord here as well. Sure. Yeah. While we're all like singing these hymns, everybody else feel okay. Yeah. I think we all feel it, you know? And then the next thing you know, you can't remember if you ever actually felt the Spirit of the Lord, or if you just hang out with a lot of people who feel the Spirit of the Lord. And so much of Christianity is, if you're not trying hard enough, the devil's going to get you. So the last thing you're going to do is admit that you don't feel the Spirit of the Lord in that room, because that makes you a heretic, right? That makes you like, oh no, I'm not doing it right. When I don't think anybody's doing it right. And they're just looking around at everybody else pretending. So they pretend, and you're all just pretending.
There was a church that we visited one time as a missionary family, because the way it worked, we had to visit individual churches and raise support from each church, maybe like anywhere from $15 a month to $100, what have you. And there was one church in Ohio, I'll never forget. We were in the middle of a missions conference where every night in the week, a different missionary would present their work. And we were one of the visiting missionaries. We had to be there for the whole thing. And one night, the pastor got up and he said that he didn't believe that God was moving in that missions conference. And he demanded that everyone in his congregation who was present, if they had any sin in their life, no matter how small, they needed to stand up and confess it publicly to the rest of the congregation, because they might be the people who's preventing that missions conference from being successful.
That's blackmail, and that is a crime.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely a crime.
That is extortion, and that is a crime.
Yes,
wow.
and what made it even more awkward was the lady we were staying with in her house. You know, her and her family. She got up and she confessed like 5 or 6 things, and you know, because she kept thinking, "Oh, I thought of another thing," and you know, and so it would like keep going back to her. We went like late into the night. With people just, you know, confessing everything from stealing a candy bar when they were a kid to, you know, like even bigger things. And it was so awkward because that pressure was there to, you know, make yourself vulnerable in front of all these, I mean, relative strangers. There's no sense of boundaries. And there's that pressure that if you don't do exactly as they say, you could be the person that's preventing the omnipotent God of the universe from doing something, right? Which try to make that math.
Right. And not only that, but like if you start to doubt and if you start to cause like problems, everybody knows what you did.
Yes.
So if I were you, I'd take a seat. Ooh, gross. That's horrible. You know, so my mom has been a teacher in public schools for 20 years. And she will do this thing where the day after she has a sub, she walks into the room and all she says is, before I read the note from this sub, does anybody want to tell me exactly what happened yesterday? And they start throwing each other under the bus. They're like, Brett was talking, Sally had her cell phone. Yeah, and they spill all the tea, like fights start happening, right? Like people start throwing each other under the bus so hard. And then she reads the note and the sub is like, oh, they were great, no problems. She just wanted to see how quick they would throw each other under the bus, right? And I feel like that's exactly what that is people. So belief. I don't think that Christian belief is real. And right. I think the proof that they don't believe they're actually held there by fear is in moments like that. If you are a true Christian and you believe in God and you believe in his love and you believe in his mercy, you're not going to feel pressured to stand up and confess your sins because you know that you've already confessed them to him and gotten forgiveness and you are loved by God. If you are secretly maybe questioning stuff that doesn't make sense and you feel scared and the only reason you're staying a Christian is because you're convinced the rapture is real and that God is coming and that Revelations is true, you're going to stand up real quick and you're going to confess your sins out of fear. And so I think moments like that show us the difference between genuine belief in God and fear, sadness, the fear of going to hell, the fear of losing your family, the fear of losing your support network, the fear of whatever else might happen to you in that room, forcing you to be like, maybe by being the biggest sinner right now, I'm actually the best Christian because nobody would ever admit to this stuff unless they truly loved God. Unless they truly wanted his mercy. So maybe in a weird way, that makes me a better Christian if I stand up right now and I talk about all the bad stuff I did. When in reality, it's just totally fucked up.
Yeah, that's actually a brilliant way of putting it because it just explains so much. Like when you start questioning, all that, when you start actually looking at the people who are in charge and where they continue to fail, and yet they somehow face no consequences, that's when it starts to fall apart. And that is why I genuinely believe my dad said, we don't talk about these things. When I pointed out these, because when we start to say, wait a minute, why does it apply to me and not them? It all starts to fall apart. Like,
and it gets scary too.
Yes.
Because if that's not true, what else might not be true? And
Exactly.
if you allow your brain to start asking questions like that, it gets scary because you start to realize, like the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, have I wasted 40 years of my life believing stuff that's not true? Or nope, I didn't. I sure didn't. We're just going to keep going.
Yep. And that was pretty much where I came to in my own deconstruction, because when I first started out, I promised myself, I was like, okay, well, obviously everything I learned in fundamentalism was wrong. So I'm going to go check out some other churches I may not have, ever had the desire to go to, other denominations, other, maybe more mainstream things I would have considered liberal back in my day. And the only thing where I'm going to stop is, hey, there's a God and there's Jesus, and Jesus is real and he's my best friend, and we'll just go from there and see what happens. And after maybe about 2 years of that, I started saying, I'm going to have to dig deeper, aren't I? Ouch. So absolutely. I had to do that painful work of saying, what if I was wrong about the whole thing? And that was when it really started to hurt. But at the end of the day, I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, if you feel confident in your, I want to say choice, but honestly, like, the belief that, I don't know about you, but the belief that I feel having identified as an atheist is so much stronger than the belief I ever felt as a Christian. Yeah. Would you call what you are a belief or a choice?
I would say that it isn't, because once I saw the evidence, or lack thereof, I should say, once I saw the lack of evidence for the things I've been taught, and once I saw, just how many people have been hurt from continuing to try to force this belief in spite of the evidence, once I saw all that, I couldn't help but, that genie had already been uncorked. Like, There's not much else you could do at that point. Now, I have a lot of people, especially since I'm on TikTok and on social media, I have a lot of people saying, well, what if, you're wrong? What if there is a God and everything? And I'm just like, I will accept as evidence the same evidence I offered God or the concept thereof when I left. I'm just going to say, hey, look, I've got coffee, I got tea. If you really care, we can have a talk. I'm sure you can find time in your busy schedule to where I need to speak to the manager, the PR people, and the customer service people are not working for me. So let's have a direct one-on-one conversation, and if I'm satisfied, then we'll go from there. But if not, I mean, I'm going to take the silence as my answer. I'm well open to the idea of there being a God if there's evidence, but I don't see it, and I don't think I will. So
right. Exactly. People ask me that too. They're like, what are you going to do if God's real? And I'm like, well, if God's real, and if he truly is the forgiving, loving God of the Christian Bible, then he will understand in my heart that he did not provide the evidence I begged him for 20 years in order to believe. Like, if he's truly the God you say he is, then he will say, I failed you in the department where you asked me for evidence that you needed, and I did not provide it to you, even though I knew exactly what you needed. And hopefully we would, like you said, be able to have a conversation where I would be like, you can't fault me for feeling how I feel when I prayed to you for all these years and I asked you to show me literally anything that you knew, because you know me, because you know my heart, that you knew would make me believe in you. Instead, you just watched me go down that road, and now you're asking me why I made that decision when you're the omnipotent, omniscient one who could have stepped in and proven yourself to me, and I could have used my podcast just to talk about you the whole time and how real you are and all the evidence that I have. Like, that's fucked up. Like, you got questions, like I got questions for you. But.
And specifically too, like the idea that so many people who have used the name of God and the name of Jesus Christ to cause harm. And I'm speaking directly about people like Bill Gothard, Jack Schaap, Jack Hiles, and all these other people who have used their positions and the name of God, who according to my Bible, says that he's a jealous God who protects his people and reputation, if they're able to use that to directly harm people and face no consequences for it or nothing of any lasting significance, because they will always land on their feet, then why at some point did God not intervene directly? And I'm not talking about fire and brimstone, even though that would be nice, but even like hey, let's correct the record here. This is what I actually said. Now let's move on. One of the best pieces of literature I think that's ever been created, which is a Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition player's handbook, has had revisions. Why can't and clarifications of the rules? Why can't God do that for the Bible?
Right.
That's my question.
Yes, and I've always wondered. We had an Old Testament. We clearly had a New Testament revision. Why can't we have a third one? Where's this third one? Why can't we have a third one that explains everything modern man wants to know? Because, you're going to tell me God would not have a single thing to say on how to use social media appropriately. He wouldn't have a single thing to say on what to do and not do on the internet. I bet he would. So why is it that we could make a second edition hundreds of years ago, but a third edition, nope, that is of the devil? Why is that? Because I'd be down for a revision. If they could revise it and answer a lot of my questions, I'd probably be a Christian again, right? Yeah. I'd be like, okay, now it makes sense. But maybe we would have to admit that the whole thing was written by human beings who had ulterior motives for why they decided to make the rules what they were. And maybe we'd have to admit that the newest version would include things like women's opinions and people of color's opinions. And maybe the new version would have questions they wouldn't be able to answer. And they just want to keep things the way that it is. We'd have to say, you just want to keep things the way that it is because it works for you and it makes you a lot of money and it keeps people under your thumb. But as TikTok would say, y'all ain't ready for that conversation.
Well, and I think this actually harkens back to my experience too in my particular brand of fundamentalism and in ATI, using the King James Version exclusively, which was a huge deal when I was growing up.
Yep.
When my dad found out I was visiting other churches, he was more mad about me using another version of the Bible than he was anything else.
Isn't that weird?
Well, like you said, though, and you hit it right on the head, it's because they want to keep things the way they are because the way they are suits their purposes. I'm from the backwoods of Alabama, and I do mean the backwoods. It's way, way out there in coal mining territory. If you go and tell a whole bunch of people, using archaic language from, the 1600s in England, that this passage says this, they're going to believe you because let's face it, nobody speaks that in the common vernacular, much less the backwoods of Alabama.
Right.
So you keep hammering in on things like that, and it uses those shortcuts that I talked about earlier. That illusion of authority. You know how to say these words, therefore you must know what they mean.
Yes. And the only reason you would be afraid of a revision, and this goes politically, this goes socially, this goes biblically, is because you know exactly what the first version says, and you know exactly what parts they would want to get rid of it, and you know that those parts make your life easier and give you a little bit of a leverage above everyone else, and you want to keep it that way.
Preach.
That's the only. Not today, Satan. But that's because if you truly cared about people, if you truly wanted more people to be led to the Lord, and this goes back to this is why I think a lot of leaders of the church aren't actually Christians at all. If you truly wanted to lead more people to God, you'd be like, let's do it. Let's revise it. I'll do whatever I got to do to get you to come and be a part of Jesus's kingdom with me. Unless you're making a whole lot of money because the old version's real convenient, right? And then you're like, oh, wait a second. Oh, I don't know about that. What kind of revisions do you want? I don't know. God told, you know what? I had a conversation with God last night and he said, as much as it pains me to tell you, I really want to tell you, God told me, he said, don't revise it. He said the first version's the last version is perfect. I don't know why he didn't get it perfect the first time, but the second time he got it perfect. And he wants to leave it that way. And he also told you that you have done a lot of sins and you need to confess them. So go ahead.
Well, it sounds to me like you got some powerful rhemas, which were a huge thing in IBLP.
Rhema?
Oh, yeah. So So Rhemas I think they were probably one of the most clever things that Bill Gothard came up with. I believe it's some Greek word. I don't care anymore. But the whole concept was that the Holy Spirit would use Rhemas, which were like these little whisperings in your mind's ear to tell you how exactly a scripture fit in your particular situation or how it was to be interpreted, which was really clever because then Bill Gothard could get up in front of everyone at headquarters and elsewhere or in his newsletters to say that God gave him a rhema, that this passage means we should, eat only whole wheat bread from now on, or this passage, means that we should play classical music at our plants, which was a thing that, we did for a while. So yeah, he would push out these ideas and these concepts and these marketing opportunities claiming they were rhemas, and he would encourage people to come up with their own rhemas, which as long as it was approved by your authority, you could have as many of them as you wanted. You just had to run them by your pastor, preacher, Gothard, whoever first, So
yeah, God, ladies and gentlemen, God gave me a rhema last night. He came to me and he told me that Becky is a whore. God said it. God said it. She's a whore. God said it. I'm just repeating the rhema. See, where I'm from, rhema is those cheap noodles you buy at Walmart. That's what I thought you were talking about when you said good rhemas. That's wild. And meanwhile, you're like, hey, God gave me a rhema, and he said that there's a lot of like problematic things going on in our church. And he's like, that don't sound like a rhema to me. That sounds like you and talk to the devil. The devil gives rhemas too. So you better think about that when you go home and apologize. Apologize to God for blaming him. That's wild. Well, Chad, I want to be respectful of your time. But I have had a wonderful time talking to you. This went by so fast. I can't believe how fast this went. I'm already going to send you an invite for a second episode if you're interested.
I'm in.
But before we come to a conclusion for this particular episode, if you had any advice that you would give for somebody who maybe they haven't left, or maybe they've just left their religion and they're not quite sure where to go from here or what to do now, what would you say?
What I'd like to point out to people who are questioning or may start to have those doubts and everything is the first hurdle is trusting that little voice in your head, because you will be told by everyone who has an interest in keeping you in that is a demonic, satanic, or otherwise malevolent outside influence.
Yep.
And nothing could be further from the truth. That is you. That is the part of you that is trying to protect yourself. That is the part of you that wants the best for you. And that little voice is actually your friend. Because I believe that in all of us, we do have a sense of, hey, we want to be the best version of ourselves that we want to be. And that's just that part of you saying, what if, I'm being held back, or what if I'm being exploited? If that is happening in your head, do have the courage to trust that and to explore that further, because at the end of the day, only you can live your life. And you're going to want to come to the end of it knowing that you did the best you could with what you had. And that little voice is the first step. Please, please, please trust it. I waited way too long to do it. And I hope that you listen to it sooner rather than later. Yeah. To the extent you can safely, too. I understand not everybody can on an equal footing. Some people are in horrible situations. And if that's the case, trust it enough to try to find any resource you can to reach out. And if I may plug, Recovering from Religion is one of the biggest resources I've seen that does. It's anonymous. They have people who are experienced to talk to people who are just have doubts about their beliefs for any reason. They're not there to proselytize or anything. They're just there to help you talk it out and really work it out for yourself. So find resources like that. If you're in immediate danger and everything, try to reach out to a shelter or someplace that can help you. And just do everything you can to try to explore where that voice is leading you. So,
absolutely. Yeah. First, it's not a rhema. It is your exactly. Evolutionary thought process trying to save you. It's the same thing that taught cavemen us to run away when we saw predators. But 100%. Like, it's those first baby steps, whether it's using the library internet as opposed to your internet at home to look this stuff up, whether it's listening to podcasts, but you can't subscribe to them because they can't be seen on your phone. So you just listen to them, individually to see what other people are saying. Like you said, a lot of people are in very unsafe positions right now to be able to just publicly be like, I don't believe in God. But taking those baby steps matters, and reaching out to anybody you think can help you also matters. And there are people that want to help you, and they're not the same people that have been saying all of your life they want to help you. They're not the people of the church. They're the people outside of the church. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, Chad, Arch Radish, I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for your story and your wisdom and your experience and your commentary. You have so much insight, and I couldn't agree more with like 900% of what you said. And I think that people who listen to this episode will really find a lot of helpful information, a lot of things that they both fortunately and unfortunately relate to. And I think you stand as a wonderful example of the idea that there's life after these, what's the word I want to say, like leaving these situations that people find themselves in, and they feel entirely lost, even though they've made the first step. And so thank you so much for that.
Sydney, I cannot thank you enough for giving me this time, and thank you again for everything you're doing. From everything I've heard of your podcast and it leading up to this and in interacting with you, you're very empathetic. You're very just. I appreciate and love what you're doing, and
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me be part of it.